we've turned the page, and we've been discussing at length the laws of a half a slave. And we went through a lot of the Tosfos's insights and questions, and numerous questions of because we're basically using the process of eliminating all options. What are the options for this Eved to fulfill the mitzvah of having children and filling the world? And he's in a scenario where he doesn't seem to have any options. And because of that, we force the master to free him. So we've been dealing with that issue of freeing the slave and all the other options. Can he marry an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, can he sell himself as an Eved Ivri, as a Jewish slave for his day of freedom? Let him sell himself as a Jewish slave, and then maybe he could marry a non-Jewish maidservant. But Tosfos says that won't work. We came up with other ideas that maybe he could marry a mamzeres, a illegitimate woman who was born from an affair, and maybe he could marry her. We came up with that. That wouldn't work. It would cause more mamzerim in the world. It would cause more illegitimate people in the world, which would make more problems. And we tried a few different options. Tosfos even gives more options. I didn't want to really get into too many, but he did have other additional options. And ultimately, the Gemara's conclusion is that the option, the final option, is that it's loy, that it's because of tikkun ha'olam, because of the world, because the world is meant for dwelling, therefore to settling, therefore we force the master to free him. Again, this is a half a slave, so he's owned by a master only half of the days, and the rest of the days he's free, and we force that master who owns him half of his days, that he has to free him so that he'll be a totally free person and marry a regular Jewess, and then be able to fulfill the mitzvah of having children. Yes, David?
In a situation where his children are not his, they belong to the master, is he fulfilling the commandment to be fruitful and multiply through that, or not?
I do not believe so. They're not. He needs to have children that are meyuchas, that are, connected to him, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe Tosfos over here, the fourth Tosfos seems to imply that you need zaroi meyuchas. He needs to have children that are connected to him. That they're officially his children. So now there are discussions, and I must tell you, even though we did mention the Tosfos over here, but I did find Tosfos in Gittin does argue with some of the Tosfos over here. For example, Tosfos in Gittin mentions that there's a difference. We discussed the difference between Pirya Virivya and Lasheves Yitzara. The mitzvah of pru or vu is to multiply, be fruitful and multiply. In Lasheves Yitzara means to settle the world, which sounds like the same thing. Now, pru or vu is in the Torah. Lasheves Yitzara, to settle the world, is in Isaiah. And it's rare that the Gemara will bring a source from Isaiah when it's a commandment in the Torah. If it's a commandment in the Torah, that would be normally the ideal source. And our Gemara brings this verse from Isaiah, which it seems surprising, and we mentioned this question yesterday. Why does it bring a source from Isaiah? The Shabbos Yitzhak should bring the source from Pru or Vu, which is the commandment to have children. So Tosfos over here does not want to answer that a non-Jew, an Eved, a slave or a half a slave, he does not have an obligation of pru or vu in the Torah to be fruitful and multiply, but he does have an obligation, Lasheves Yitzara, to settle the world. So the reason why the Gemara brings the verse from Isaiah is because for a slave, you need to bring that verse. If he was a regular Jew, you would bring the verse from Pru or Vu, right? That was the a simple answer to the Gemara, but Tosfos says you can't answer that. Tosfos over here says that's not a good answer, and he tries to prove from a Jerusalem Talmud that answer doesn't fly. However, Tosfos in Gittin does answer that. So it seems to be an argument between the commentary of Tosfos here versus the commentary of Tosfos in Gittin. If you can answer if that's a correct answer, it's obviously two opinions. Again, the Tosfos, and there were numerous Baalei Tosfos, numerous rabbis who wrote this commentary. It was a group of numerous rabbis who wrote these commentaries called Tosfos, and they a lot of them were grandchildren of Rashi, and ultimately, you often find the Tosfos here might hold one way, but there might be a Tosfos somewhere else that argues, and that's what we find here, that there is such a debate if this is the reason why it uses this verse versus Pirya, Pru, or Vu. Now, the answer that Tosfos over here wants to give is that this asay is olim tefei. This is a stronger asay. This is a stronger command over Pru or Vu. Now that sounds surprising. The Torah says Pru or Vu, which is a mitzvah, and in Isaiah it says this, that the world was created to be settled. And so Tosfos says, you know why it brings that verse? Because that verse in Isaiah is a stronger verse than the mitzvah of Pru or Vu in the Torah. Now, what does that mean? It's stronger. So what it seems like, and yesterday I left that with a little question mark, like what exactly, why would it be stronger? But it seems that the reason why it's stronger is because here we're thinking about a global purpose. The purpose of the whole creation is loy l'tohu bara. Hashem did not create the world to be desolate. He created the world for settlement. That sounds like a very global cause, a very major importance. And while the verse of Pru or Vu sounds like a regular command, regular mitzvah. So because of that, Tosfos says that's why the Gemara, it could have brought the other verse as well. It could have brought Pru or Vu as well, but it brings this verse, the way Tosfos learns in our Gemara, it brings this verse because it's bringing a verse that has a more powerful impact. It's a stronger olim. The word in Aramaic is olim. It's stronger. It's a stronger asay, a stronger positive command. And the reason why it's stronger is not because it's in the prophets. Normally, the Torah would be stronger. The reason it's stronger is because it emphasizes the global purpose of the world, is that Hashem created the world, that it should be settled. And it shouldn't just be, we shouldn't be worried about, having too many children and, there's not going to be enough space in the world. We should, on the contrary, Hashem created it that it should be settled, and we should try to help fulfill that goal that Hashem wanted. And therefore, it chooses this verse of Laila Tayhu Bara Lasheves Yitzra. So that's the way Tosfos here answers. Again, I mentioned that the Tosfos in Gittin does a different answer, and the Tosfos in Gittin's answer is that there's a difference in law with regard to the Lasheves Yitzra and with regard to Pru or Vu, that if it applies to a slave or not, and it could be that a slave would not be obligated in Pru or Vu, but he is obligated in Lasheves Yitzra. And it's interesting because the reason why it's mentioned in other places is there are other Gemaras that also bring this verse. Whenever it brings this verse, it seems to be a question. It seems to be a question of why is the Gemara bringing this verse and not the verse called Pru or Vu, be fruitful and multiply? So it's a common question asked whenever the Gemara brings that verse in Isaiah. So automatically you got to ask, why is it bringing this verse and not the verse in Torah, Pru or Vu, in Bereshis? Okay, so the Gemara continued and talked about a deaf person, a cheresh. And the Gemara concluded, yesterday we learned this new Gemara, and the Gemara concluded that, when we talk about a deaf person being exempt, we're talking about someone who's exempt, that is, doesn't hear and cannot speak. So when we talk about deaf, we're talking about einoi shomea ve'einoi medaber. He doesn't hear and he doesn't speak. So what is this rule? Why is he free, exempt from these mitzvahs? Here we're talking about the mitzvah of going to the Beis Hamikdash, bringing the sacrifice for the holidays and going there for the holidays. And we're saying that he's exempt. This cheresh, that he doesn't hear and he doesn't speak, he is exempt. However, if he would hear but he doesn't speak, or he would speak but he doesn't hear, such a person who's just deaf but he's not mute, or he's just mute and not deaf, he would be obligated in doing this mitzvah. But if he's deaf and mute, then he's exempt. What's the reason behind it? So the reason anyone have any thought, why would he be exempt? Why does it have to be both deaf and mute? So Isaac is pointing to his brain.
That's what the rest of the Gemara said.
We assume he is not capable of full-mindedness, as it were.
So
restricted with the input, we figure.
So what Isaac is saying is correct, that there's a big problem for a person who's deaf and mute. What's the problem? They never really interact with anyone. They never were able to interact with anyone. They don't go to schooling. They don't have a way of communicating. In fact, the reason why they don't speak is because they don't hear. If someone never heard in their life, so they don't know how to talk because they don't know how to make sounds. So because they were born deaf, naturally they'll be mute. And because they're deaf and mute, generally, at least in the olden days, they would be placed in more like a institution where they're just, they live like vegetables. Unfortunately, that would be the way things were in the olden days. And they never really develop the ability, their brain doesn't really develop a level of responsibility, meaning they might be smart people, just like a child. A child is also not obligated in some of these mitzvahs, right? We mentioned a katan, a shaita, a fool. A fool obviously is exempt. He doesn't have a developed brain properly, a fool. But a child could be very smart.
It's not so much a fool, it's a real idiot. I mean, you're talking about somebody who...
Right, he has a mental issue. I don't know the best way to a mental retardation.
Shot these days, yeah.
If he's retarded, that would be an issue that they don't have das. They don't have a certain level of responsibility and knowledge to be able. Now, a child could be very smart, but he also doesn't have that responsibility level of understanding responsibility and making proper judgment. That's a very good word, Isaac. Thank you. Making proper judgment and understanding other people, and if they're serious, if they're not serious, to be able to understand, to judge and evaluate situations and make decisions on their judgment, based on their judgment. A child wouldn't be able to do that. A child is very smart, could be brilliant, but he's not at this stage where he could make a proper judgment. Always, he might be playing and into his childishness and so on, even though he's brilliant. The same thing would be this deaf mute person, that he never was able to develop that part of him that maybe should have been able. It's not like he's retarded, a deaf mute person, but he never developed that ability to make those judgments because of his disability of not being able to hear and not being able to speak, and then automatically not being able to communicate. Now,
Rabbi?
I do want to mention before I take your question, Ben, I do want to mention that the Ksav Sofer was the son of the Chassam Sofer, made a revolutionary halachic decision. And I don't know exactly when he lived, probably around 200 years ago, but I'd have to look up exactly when the Ksav Sofer lived. But he made this really revolutionary decision. He traveled. He traveled to some place in Vienna where they had a school for deaf people, and he was blown away when he saw how they were successfully teaching deaf people sign language and being able to communicate. So he concluded that, you know what, deaf, mute people that go to this school are obligated in mitzvahs. And he paid the headmaster money to buy tefillin for all the Jewish students that were there. Now, this was revolutionary because our Gemara tells us that deaf mute is exempt from mitzvahs. And he said that is a deaf mute person that never develop their ability to communicate with others. But if they are able to communicate with others, and they've been able to be taught in sign language, they would be obligated in mitzvahs, and therefore these deaf people who are in this school, they're obligated. And he paid for the tefillin for these Jewish students. Now, the Maharam Shik, who was another halachic authority, argued on the Ksav Sofer. So there's been this debate that's been going back and forth over the last maybe 200 years about this issue. Maybe I should say probably more like 300 years, but it's going back and forth, and it hasn't been really clarified. But generally we assume that we try to be machmir like the Ksav Sofer and assume that they are obligated in mitzvahs. So this is the practical application of this law of the cheres that the Gemara talks about, and yet how does it apply in today's day and age? It does seem to have the reason behind it has to be, you have to take that into consideration and understand that there might be a change based on the fact that the scenario has changed, just the practicality of it has changed, and by teaching them and so on, they can make these type of decisions and communicate, and there might be communities of such people that communicate this way. So that's the practical side of things. Now, Ben, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say basically what you were saying. There was no sign language in those days of the Gemara. What you're talking about now is a later rabbi that found out that there is some kind of sign language. But it wasn't common in the world to have a sign language. And that was the problem. They were not stupid.
Right.
They just didn't have a way to communicate.
But not communicating caused that they wouldn't be able to
they didn't know what
and judge.
They didn't know what they needed to do or what they didn't need to do, Yeah.
Right. They didn't have what we would call das. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, but Ben just said about that they did not sign language, but isn't there a Gemara that I think some of the people who had come back from Bavel were looking for various things around in the area of the Beis Hamikdash was it, and that they came. They came across this. They came across this mute, and
okay, so we're going to see a story
to them in sign language.
I don't know about that story, but there's a story here we're going to soon see about some people who are deaf mutes. We're gonna soon see about some stories over here on page 3A. So we'll hold it for there, unless you find, and if you find another additional story, maybe we'll listen to it. We'll hear it. We'll look into it. But that we'll see on 3a. Let's wait for 3a for see that story there. So here we have the Gemara that talks about cheresh, which literally means deaf, elaim, which means mute, and the Gemara tells us that whenever we talk about cheresh is exempt, we refer to a deaf mute that's combination of both. Because if someone's only deaf but they're not mute, it means that they used to be able to hear and they learned how to speak, and then at a later stage they became deaf, but they really do have the ability to understand things because they used to be able to hear, and therefore they would not be exempt. And the same thing would apply to someone who is mute but is not deaf. And such a person could understand everyone and could understand what responsibility is and make judgments, and make proper judgment. But the fact that he can't speak might be some type of a physical issue, energy issue, a muscle issue, but it's not a mental issue. And that would be also, you would be obligated in the commandments. The person who is exempt is again this person that is missing some type of a ability to make proper judgment. So that's the first Gemara here, that when it says cheresh, it's referring to someone similar to a shaita in a katan, similar to a mentally retarded person and a child. That's the type of person that a cheresh is exempt. It's lav b'nei deya, and that's what the rabbi spoke about. And then the Gemara brought a brisa that way, that when the rabbis that whenever we talk about someone who's just deaf, he's like a regular person. Whenever we talk about someone who's just mute, he's like a regular person. And what meaning that if a person would be both, that's the case where you would have someone who would be exempt. Okay, and then the Gemara brought a pasuk that cheresh means deaf and elaim means mute, and it also says the word elaim is a combination of two words, ishtakil milule. I believe we did that. Ishtakil milule, I believe we did that yesterday. Ishtakil milule means his words were taken. So meaning that he's not able to speak. And if you combine those two words, you get the word elaim, ishtakil milule. So then the Gemara, the next Gemara that we're up to is going to continue talking about the exemptions of someone who is deaf, mute, or both. So now we're going to start by the two dots. We're on page 2b, and we are maybe 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber.
It's number 4 in my print.
Okay, number 4 in Ben's print. I don't know if anyone has that, but if you do, thank you, Ben. The Gemara says, "Medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber is chayiv." The Gemara brings this brisa that says someone who's medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber, they would be like pikchen, they would be chayiv in all their it's actually a mishnah. The Gemara brought two things. The first, the Gemara brought a mishnah that said shemeya ve'enoi medaber, medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber is chayiv. That was a mishnah. And then the Gemara brought a brisa. So actually this is bringing that mishnah. Medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber is chayiv. And
but that's already number 6.
6, okay. So the Gemara says, "V'hatanya, didn't we learn in a brisa, medaber ve'enoi shemeya, shemeya ve'enoi medaber is pater? Didn't we learn another brisa, which means another statement of the Tanoim? We have a written statement of the Tanoim that says that he's exempt. Someone who's just deaf or someone who's just mute, they're exempt from being oila regel. So to going to the Beis Hamikdash for the holidays. So Amar Ravina says it's not a contradiction. Vitema Rava, some say Rava said this. It's not a contradiction. Why is it not a contradiction? Not a contradiction because Chasure mechsera, it's missing words, v'hachi katani, and this is what it should have said. Hakol chayavin b're'iyah. Everyone is obligated in being oila regel, going to the Beis Hamikdash for the holidays. Uvesimcha, and everyone's obligated in being joyous with shalmei simcha, with sacrifices, peace offering of simcha, of joy. Chutz, except mecheresh hamadaber ve'enoi shemea she'enoi shemea ve'enoi madaber, except for a deaf person or a mute person. Because such a person, shepater min hariyah, that person is exempt from being oile regel, from going to the Beis Hamikdash. Why is he exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash? We're going to put that on hold and we're going to continue. Even though he is exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash, he is chayiv in simcha, in joy. Now, the Gemara is saying that he would be obligated in simcha, but he's exempt from re'iyah. Now, Rashi interestingly says, even though he's exempt from oilas re'iyah, lirais. So what does that mean? That Rashi now jumps and tells us he's obligated in going to the Beis Hamikdash. He's just exempt from bringing that sacrifice. He's exempt from bringing the sacrifice, the oilas re'iyah. And even though he's exempt from that sacrifice, he is chayiv in simcha, to be joyous on the holiday, which is with the karban shlamim, of course, with the peace offering, and he's a mitzvah for him to eat the meat. And we'll soon see the reason for the exemption and the reason for the obligations. So in the meantime, the Mishnah, this statement of either Ravina or Rava, that they explain that there are some words missing. So he's pater min hariyah, and but he's chayiv in simcha. Yes.
That's impossible if you translate re'iyah as seeing and being seen. Because here they tell you that he's responsible to go and be seen.
We already discussed.
He doesn't see, but he's going to be seen.
So oilas re'iyah.
So the first translation was incorrect, that it means both. It only means to see.
1 second. When we started the Mishnah on page 2a,
Yeah.
we mentioned there that there's a whole debate. Re'iyah could mean both, and each time we have to figure out what it means, right? So it could mean oilas re'iyah, the sacrifice that is called the burnt offering of re'iyah, or it could mean to going up to the Beis Hamikdash for the holidays, to be seen in the Beis Hamikdash. So re'iyah could mean oilas re'iyah, or the actual re'iyah of being seen by Hashem when you travel to Israel, to Yerushalayim, to the Har HaBayis, to the Azara, to be seen by Hashem.
Yeah, but when you continue and you keep hearing that re'iyah means only this or only that, it doesn't go.
I'm not sure what you mean. When
You say
continue,
it can mean either that or either that,
or both.
or both. So you know, how do you know what, you know, so they decide here it's going to be just this and the other one is going to be just that. In other words, the blind person is going to mean, in this case, only being seen. But in the other case, it's going to mean he's patur because he does not see.
Well, let's finish the Gemara, and then you'll tell me.
Okay,
You'll
okay.
see if it works. So, oh boy, we got to mute everyone here. Mute everyone. Okay, I'm not sure what's bothering you, Ben, but we'll try to make sure you. Did I lose you? Are you still here, Ben? Where did you get lost? I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, we'll try to explain it later if anyone doesn't get it. So here, the Gemara says that everyone is obligated, hakol chayavin, everyone was obligated in re'iyah and simcha, in these two things, except for a cheresh, a deaf person that speaks, or a mute person that hears, because such a person is patur from re'iyah, he's patur from the going up to the Beis Hamikdash and bringing the sacrifice of re'iyah. And even though he's patur from the sacrifice of re'iyah, chayiv besimcha, he is obligated in simcha, in the joy. But a person who doesn't do either, and a shaita, the katan, and a mentally retarded person, and a katan, a child, they are pater af min hasimcha, also from the simcha, which simply means the joy, the joyousness by eating the sacrifice of, participating in the sacrifice of the peace sacrifice called Shalmei Simcha. And the reason why they are exempt is because these three people, the deaf mute, again, it's one person who's deaf mute, a shaita, mentally retarded, and a katan, and a child, all these three would be exempt. And the reason why they're exempt, again, it's a certain age, a certain stage in life that the katan would be exempt. We already spoke about that in the Mishnah, that there are katans, a certain stage, argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, when they're obligated, when a child becomes obligated. But before that stage, he would be similar to the shaita and the cheresh. They would all be exempt, but because they are similar to their being exempt from all mitzvahs that it mentions in the Torah. Tanya Nami Hachim, we also have a brisa that says this. Hakol chayavin bere'iyah ubesimcha. Everyone's obligated in re'iyah, which means either going up to the Beis Hamikdash or for the holidays, or bringing the karban re'iyah, or both. And everyone's obligated in the simcha, in doing this, participating in the karban called the Shalmei Simcha, the peace offering of joy for the holidays. It's mitzvah to be mesameach, and part of that, or one of the main ways to fulfill that, is with this sacrifice, eating meat, eating the meat of the sacrifice. So everyone's obligated in all that, except except a deaf person who is able to speak, or a mute person who is able to hear, shepeturim min hare'iyah, that they are exempt. They are exempt from the re'iyah, from the appearance, which we're translating as maybe both appearance and the sacrifice, are definitely referring to the sacrifice. He's exempt from bringing that oilas re'iyah. Va'aval pisha pater min hare'iyah, but even though he is exempt from the re'iyah, which is this sacrifice, he would be obligated, chayiv b'simcha, he would be obligated in the joy. We just turned the page, we're on page 3a now. He is chayiv b'simcha. He is obligated in being mesameach on the holiday. V'samachta b'chagecha, which is a famous song. V'samachta b'chagecha, that it's a mitzvah to be joyous on your holiday. And the Gemara later explains that refers to this peace offering of simcha. Now, the Gemara explains, what about someone who's a deaf mute? Now this brisa continues, and it says, what about the person who's a deaf mute, and the person who's mentally retarded, and a katan and a child? So all of these three categories, these three people are af beturin af mina simcha. They are exempt also from simcha. So there's a category that's exempt from all of the mitzvahs, and there's a category that's exempt from re'iyah. Now the Gemara asks, why would that be? Maishna le'inyan simcha de machayvi. I'm sorry, I skipped 4 words. Maishna. Let me read it again. From the top of the page. Chayiv besimcha. The person who is from the top of the page, 3a. I'm going to start from the top of the page again. Chayiv besimcha is referring to the person who might be who's exempt from re'iyah, person who's deaf but not mute, and he's mute but not deaf. That person is chayiv in simcha, even though he's exempt from re'iyah, from the bringing that sacrifice, the oilas re'iyah, but he would be obligated in the peace offering sacrifice. He would be obligated in having the meat from the peace offering sacrifice. But someone who's doesn't hear and doesn't speak, so someone who is a deaf mute, and a shaita v'katan, paturin af min simcha, they would be also exempt from the simcha, this peace offering. So those, why? Hoyel, since upeturin, that they are exempt, mikol mitzvahs ha'amurais b'Torah, from all the mitzvahs that are mentioned in the Torah. And so there's a difference between someone who's both deaf and mute and someone who is just deaf or just mute. Now, why is there a differentiation between these two sacrifices, the re'iyah and the simcha? Now, again, it's a little unclear. The re'iyah has been bringing up that re'iyah could mean appearance and it could mean sacrifice. But however you're going to learn it, the re'iyah, they're obligated in, this person who's deaf but not mute, or the person who's mute but not deaf, he's obligated in this re'iyah, and he is exempt. He's exempt from re'iyah and he's obligated in simcha. So there's a differentiation here between re'iyah and simcha. So we're asked, so why? Why is it different regarding re'iyah and the patira that they're exempt? Simcha de machayvi. And why would it be that when regarding simcha they're obligated? So the Gemara answers that le'inyan re'iyah gamar re'iyah mehakel. Regarding re'iyah, we learn re'iyah from hakel. We learn the law of re'iyah, which is this, however you're going to translate it, but re'iyah is learned from hakel. And dechsiv, it says by hakel, which is this year, we're in the year of hakel. And this is hakel is always the year after the Shemitah. Last year was a Shemitah year. So 5783 is the hakel year. But 5782 was a Shemitah year. And I believe the Shemitah years are all divisible by 7. Let me just double check that. 5782 divided by 7 equals, yes. There's a way, if you want to calculate, if a year is a Shemitah year, you divide it by 7. If it's a solid number, then it could be it would make sense that it's a Shemitah year. But 5783 divided by 7, you'll have a decimal, you'll have a fraction afterwards. So 5782 was a Shemitah year. 5783 is a year of hakel. Now, what is the law by hakel? Hakel, it says the word re'iyah, And the law by Hakel was the chsiv, as it says, Hakel es ha'am, gather the nation, ho'anashim, the men, ha'anashim, the men, ve'hanashim, and the women, ve'hataf, and the children, uksiv, and it says, v'voy kol Yisrael liros, when all the Yidden come to see. V'hasam minolan, and over there, where do we know that a person who is either deaf or mute is exempt? So the chsiv, as it says, laman yishmu laman yilmu, that it says, in order that you listen and in order that you learn. And the Gemara says we have a brisa, but Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Lama'an Yishma'u, that since it says in order that you listen, in other words, what was the purpose of coming to the Hakel event again at the end of the year after the Shemitah during Sukkot? They would make this big event, and the king would read portions of Devarim, the book of Devarim, and it was supposed to be an inspirational moment, and supposed to take the inspiration with us from this special gathering. And it says over there, Laman Yishmu, you have to come in order to hear, Ulaman Yilmadu, in order that you learn. Now, what would that make sense? In order to hear, sound like you need to be able to hear, right? It says in order to hear. Yeah, you're coming there in order to hear. So it would make sense that a person who was deaf would be exempt. And Laman Yilmadu would seem to be a teaching that you would need to be able to learn and speak the words of Torah. You have to learn, you have to speak, you have to be able to speak. If you're mute, it would seem to be an exception, an exemption, that someone is mute, they would be exempt. Yes, David.
Yeah, as far as all the years being divided by 7 Shemitah years, but in the olden days when they celebrated Yovel, the Jubilee year, didn't that throw off the 7s?
So according to one opinion, it did. There's an argument in the Gemara if it threw it off or not, but I'm not telling you to do this in the time that we do Yovel. I'm telling you nowadays, if you want to know if a year is Shemitah. I'm giving you a little trick of how to know, but it's not going to work once we start counting the Yovels. It's a machlokes, really.
If you're counting back from 57, 83, or 82, and you're getting solid numbers, incorporated in all those 7s had to be the time period where it was thrown off, because there was 7, and then you came to the 50th. That delayed the next Shemitah, the next 7, by a year.
Again, it's a machlokes in the Gemara. If that's true, what you're saying, it's a machlokes. But I believe the halacha follows what you're saying, but it doesn't apply nowadays because we don't do Yovel. And so nowadays, if you want a little trick of how to calculate a Shemitah year, you can use my trick. It works. Why does it work? Because nowadays we don't count that Yovel year, and so nowadays it's going to be every 7 years. If we would count the Yovel year, it will knock off my trick. But
what about all those years that they did count the Yovel year? That's got to be figured into the 57, 82 divided by 7.
Not now. Who cares what they did and what they messed? That things wouldn't work then. If you want to know nowadays if it works, if it's every 7 years, it's going to work. That, in other words, the calculation will work, because we don't care what happened in the past. In some years of the past might not, we might not be able to figure out if the year 3000 was a Shemitah year or not. You're right. We don't know if the year 3000, but if any current years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, you can calculate by these, after the Yidden we're not practicing Yovel, you can calculate these you can calculate it through the sevens. But if that's what you're saying, that in the year 2000, 2800, maybe that year, maybe they didn't, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't be divisible by 7. I understand what you're saying, that those years, it wouldn't necessarily be, because they might have counted the Yovel as a separate year and it would mess up that cycle. But now that we have the cycle, there's a way to calculate the Yovel. Just happens to be, it works out this way.
Yeah, but
Rabbi,
but if it's off, then it would be off now, even though there's
it
no.
would not.
Well, let me ask you a question. When is the next Yovel year? If the year 5782 was Shemitah, when was the next Shemitah? If the year 5782, can you add 7, or are you going to maybe? Well, it might have to add 8, right? Because maybe there's a Yovel there. No, we're not practicing Yovel, so you know that if 5782 is Shemitah, add 7, and you'll tell me that 5789 will be a Shemitah year, and you'll be right.
Rabbi, the reason it works out, I think, works out, if they stopped at the year that it was dividing by the Shemitah was dividing by 7.
Once they stop,
from there on, they don't do Yovel, then it works out.
It works out. As long as now we stop, it'll work. Again, I'm not a math teacher, so if you can't follow what I'm saying, it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm not claiming to be a good math teacher.
If they stopped at the year that they stopped doing Yovel, and it did divide by 7, then it will continue dividing by 7.
So the Gemara anyway mentions over here that the Hakel year, the purpose of the Hakel was L'man Yishmu, L'man Yilmedu. L'man Yishmu means in order that you will hear, and L'man Yilmedu means in order that you'll learn. So what does the Gemara say from these two words? That brings a brisa. V'tanya, we learned in a brisa, L'man Yishmu prat l'medaber ve'enai shemea, that it says in order that you will hear. So you're supposed to listen to the king, read the words from the book of Deuteronomy, from the book of Devarim, certain portions that were chosen, it's clarified in Tractate Saita, talks about exactly what they would read. So they would. So the Gemara here says that L'man Yishmu, in order that you will hear, that the prat l'medaber, that excludes medaber ve'enai shemea, someone who speaks and doesn't hear. That a person who's deaf, what would he come for? In order to hear the king, you're not going to hear the king. He's deaf. And in order that you will learn, which the Gemara is understanding to mean, that means you would speak words of Torah, that if you're coming to do that, it's not going to work because you're mute. Someone who's mute is exempt as well. So we have L'man Yishmu, L'man Yilmedu, that would exempt someone who's only partially a cheresh. In other words, he only has one of those issues. He's deaf but not mute, or he's mute but not deaf, but he's exempt. He's going to be exempt from the Hakel. From that gathering of Hakel, he would be exempt. Now, if he's exempt from Hakel, the Gemara is saying, now let's get the flow. The flow is that if he's exempt from Hakel, he's going to be exempt from Re'iyah. That's what the Gemara's flow is. He's exempt from Hakel. Hakel and Re'iyah go together. And if he's exempt from one, he's exempt from the other. But the Gemara is not satisfied yet to get to the conclusion. First, we get stuck with a story over here. And the Gemara asks, Lememra dechiloi mishtoi, are you saying that if a person doesn't speak, loy gamar, he can't learn? If someone doesn't speak, he can't learn? V'ha, isn't there, and this is the story I was mentioning to you, Mordechai, you're still here, I see you. But the story is that V'ha, Hanu Trey Ilmi, there were two mute people. Dahava b'shiva vaisei the Rebbe, they were in the neighborhood of Rebbe. B'nai Brate de Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, they were the sons of the daughter of Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, and Va'amri la b'nei Achte de Rabbi Yochanan. Some say they were the children of the sister of Rabbi Yochanan, and the Chol Emas to have a Ayel Rebbe Levei Medrasha. Whenever Rebbe would enter the base medrash, the study, the place of study, the house of study, Havu Ayel v'Yosvi Kamayu, they would sit before Rebbe. So Rebbe was the compiler of the Mishnah, and there are two mute people that they would always come whenever he would give his drasha, he would give his speech, or whenever he would even come there, just to come. They would always go there, and they were like Hasidim of Rebbe. They were his followers, and they whenever he would go there, they would sit down before him. Umanaidi b'rei shayu, and they would move. They would move their heads with their heads. They would like nod or make gestures with their head. Umarachshin sifsasayu, and their lips would move, but they were mute. Now, Uboy Rebbe Rachmi Alayhu, and Rebbe begged Hashem for mercy, and V'itzu, and they were healed. And now is the main point of this story. V'ishtakoch dahavu gemiri, and it came out, it was revealed, it was found, dahavu gemiri, that they were very well versed in hilchasa, in halacha, v'sifra, v'sifri, v'kula hashas. They were buckies, they were experts, they were proficient in all of these six, the whole shas, shisha sedarim, all the 6 sedarim of the Mishnah. They were bucky, they were experts in. They knew it all, it was clear. So what do we see from this? That even someone who's mute is able to learn. So the Gemara had initially said, Lama'an Yishmu means you have to be able to hear. In order to hear, that's why you have to go to Hakel to hear. And someone who's deaf, can't hear, would be exempt. And then it said, Laman Yilmadu, in order that you learn. And someone who's mute, the Gemara was understanding, at least the Brisa sounded like, if you're mute, you probably can't learn. So if you can't learn, if you're mute, you probably can't learn. You'll be exempt from going to Hakel, because it does say you have to be able to learn. And we're assuming that someone mute probably can't learn. The Gemara says, what do you mean? These mute people, did they know how to learn? They knew the entire Shisha Sedarim. So they seem to be quite knowledgeable. And so they could learn. So the Gemara answers to this question that Amar Marzutra says that you read it wrong. Karibe Laman Yalamedu. The pasuk, you have to understand it to mean that the purpose of going to Hakel is in order for you to teach. And what that means is that the verse, the wording, of course, says Yilman Yilmadu, but we sort of like use a method. We have a license of understanding. The Torah is, because the Torah is not written with vowels, it sometimes allows the tradition to play around with the way a word is pronounced. What do I mean play around? I mean to manipulate the way the world, we don't manipulate it ourselves, but there's a tradition from halacha l'maisha misinai that word is meant to also mean a meaning, even though we don't say it that way. So because the word itself has a meaning, and we have a tradition to translate it that way. So we read it Laman Yilmadu, okay, true, but it also has a ability to be read Laman Yilamedu. We have a tradition that's what it's meant to teach also, that it's meant to mean teaching. And therefore, person who's mute would be exempt. Why does the Brisa exempt someone who's mute? Because Leman Yelamedu, in order that you teach, that the reason to go to Hakel is in order to teach. And someone who's mute, unfortunately, can't teach. And therefore, they would be exempt. So they would be exempt from Hakel. So we've just exempted from Hakel someone who's deaf but not mute, and someone who's mute but not deaf. Now, are they obligated in regular mitzvahs? Yes. Someone who's deaf and not mute, mute or not deaf, they are obligated in all mitzvahs. Just happens to be Hakel is one exclusion because it doesn't. They don't fit with the purpose of Hakel. It just doesn't fit with the goal. The goal of Hakel is that you should be inspired. If you don't hear, how are you going to be inspired? The whole goal is to hear the king. So you're not going to, and the goal is to teach. Leman Yelamedu. So we read it wrong, not wrong, but the original Gemara understood it to mean Leman Yilmedu. Then the Gemara answers, no, it's Leman Yelamedu. You have to be able to teach, and a mute person can't teach. So the purpose of Hakel is not really fulfilled with a mute, someone who's mute or someone who's deaf. So they might be obligated all mitzvahs, but they're not going to be out. But Hakel would be an exception to the rule. And now our Gemara is saying the same thing would apply to Re'iyah, which we'll have to understand. It's based on the fact that there's a word in Hakel that says Re'iyah, and there's the obligation of Re'iyah, which is also says the word Re'iyah, and therefore it would learn one to the other. Yes, David. You're muted again.
Oh, so yeah. If the purpose, the partial purpose or the main purpose is to inspire him, that he's inspired, he can be inspired just by seeing all these hundreds of thousands of Jews or tens of thousands of Jews being in one place, listening to the king, even if he doesn't speak or hear.
Right. But the fact that it says in order that you hear tells us that Hashem wants you to be inspired through hearing. It's in order that you hear. It doesn't use the word inspire. So the concept of inspiration, right, from hearing, some type of a level of inspiration. And so it's the inspiration through hearing. It says those words in order that it doesn't say the words inspire. Of course, there's some meaning of an inspiration, however you're going to, if only we could translate that. There's a difference between, maybe there would be a different word for it. Maybe inspiration isn't the correct word, but there's the purpose of Hakel is Leman Yishmu, and this doesn't fall into that category. So he's not getting inspiration through hearing. He's exempt because it uses that word Yishmu. If it said the word inspiration, that would be another story. You could say maybe he is inspired. The Gemara wouldn't darshan. We'll exclude a deaf person. But since it uses the word hearing, it's excluding someone who's deaf.
What about somebody who's blind? Is he obligated or?
So that's another discussion about someone who we mentioned, someone who's even blind in one eye might be exempt, right? You remember that was the discussion on Suma Ba'achas Me'enav Pater Min Ariyah. That was one way of explaining that we were thinking of explaining the Mishnah. Suma, there were two opinions. There was depends how you want to learn the Mishnah. The Mishnah might be saying that you would be obligated in Re'iyah. So that had to do with our Gemara. Then you'd have to know how that applies to Hakel. So you're asking about Hakel. We talked about the mitzvah of Re'iyah, and you're wondering if we might learn one from the other. But again, it's not. That's getting sidetracked a little. Here we're talking about the hearing. Yes, Julian.
Rabbi, I see Jacob's on the Zoom. I just wanted to know if it's in order to wish him Mazel Tov. Jacob?
Oh, Robert.
I mean Robert?
Yeah. Yes, you can wish him Mazel Tov. Yes.
Mazel Tov, Robert.
Thank you, Julian.
Sorry,
Thank you, everyone.
I missed hearing any news. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to